Hello again, and welcome to the next exciting installment of the Who Cares About Anime podcast. It's me, Jonny Lobo, your host. Thanks for being with us today, and as always, I have a phenomenal cast of friends and peers in the anime viewing and critiquing world joining me today. So we'll do the introductions first off. You'll remember him from numerous episodes we've done in the past, and also he is the head honcho of Did You Know Anime. Here's Mike.
Who cares about anime? I thought this was Spanish class.
Usually Paden's the only one who can make me lose it in these intros. Oh man, no Spanish class here. And of course, also around this imaginary round table which we sit, I that was his idea, by the way. I've used that ever since. I stole that from him. But anyway, here's my buddy Tony, whom you will probably recognize as Black Critic Guy.
Did you know anime? I thought this was Spanish class.
Nice copy pasting there.
I had to do it. I want to be a part of the group. Hey guys, Tony the Black Critic Guy here with the two guys from Did You Know Anime. I'm very happy to be here again. It's been a while. Too long, honestly.
I agree. So thank you both for jumping in here today. And though it's not a very happy-go-lucky title, I am really looking forward to today's discussion, and I'm sure listeners and viewers, you can tell by now, the title we want to talk about today is Black Lagoon. For those of you not familiar with it, here is your usual spoiler warning. We're probably going to be talking about spoilers. We're going to primarily be covering the anime. We might mention the manga a little bit here and there. And then, I don't know if I've ever done this before. This is a pretty mature cast, I like to think. I try anyway. We have some adult themes, if you will, but perhaps more so than any other cast I've ever done on here. I guess I'll say a little viewer discretion or listener discretion as well is advised because the subject matter is just such that it's very violent, very gory, and a lot of other adult themes like that. So you have been warned. So here we go. Time for first question here. I think we'll start with you, Tony. And when and where kind of was your first experience with Black Lagoon, and what were some of your thoughts?
Well, that's a good question. I don't exactly recall the very moment I learned about Black Lagoon because I felt like it was at the genesis of when I started watching anime again. But I do remember when I watched it seriously, and that was 2011. I just moved into college, and I was trying to find a new anime to watch, and I saw this thing called Black Lagoon, and I was like, okay, so what's this all about? And I was watching it, and I enjoyed it for the first 3 episodes, and for some reason, I stopped. I have no explanation as to why. I just stopped. And then in 2013, when I created the Black Critic Guy channel, I said to myself, hey, remember that one show called Black Lagoon? Why did I stop watching that? I need to get back to that. And I watched it, and I didn't regret a single second. I loved watching Black Lagoon. If I could go back and like alter my grade a little bit, because I think I gave it like a 4 out of 5. It definitely would be a 4.5 out of 5 in my opinion at this current time. So many phenomenal, memorable characters. I had actually a lot of fun with, even though it was a very dark subject matter type anime, it still embraced the overall craziness of its themes, which I thoroughly enjoyed watching.
All right, fantastic. Thanks for sharing. And you heard it here, folks. And moved up a little bit on the scale for BCG's initial review of that. I saw that as well, and I'm sure many others have. So that's pretty cool. We're already making some great progress here today. What about you, Mike? When and where sort of thing, and what were some of your impressions about it?
Well, kind of in the same vein as Tony, I first saw Black Lagoon at a friend's house. There was a friend of ours who we would go to every weekend throughout the latter half of high school, and then the couple years afterwards, we'd all go hang out at my friend Cody's house, play games, everything that nerdy dudes do. And every once in a while, we could get everybody to sit down in a room and watch anime. And it was rare because, everybody's taste is so eclectic and so different. But the one thing that we could usually agree to get everybody in the same room in was like Western anime or anything mecha, because those are kind of, really easy, can ease people into giant robots and, stuff that kind of has a more of a, Western sensibility. We're all from North America here. So, uh, but we sat down one night and we went through the first 3 or 4 episodes of Black Lagoon. I want to say this was in 2010 or 2011, but I don't remember exactly when. And, obviously it stood out to me immediately. It kind of felt like, that particular generation of animes, Cowboy Bebop or Outlaw Star, like it was that Western feeling anime that every generation of anime fans gets. But obviously this one wasn't set in space, but uh, you know, at the time I was just, I was really blown away. A lot of stuff really stuck to me. I obviously the action and the just the maturity of it was a nice change of pace from everything that was coming out at around that time. And that's kind of how I first got introduced to Roanna per Thailand and the Black Lagoon Company.
All right, awesome, man. It's like a start of a horror film or something. Where all three are like, I don't exactly remember when, because I I don't remember the exact year either myself, but I do recall. Um, I don't often do this. I try to do it when I can, but when money allowing. But this was one where I had kind of heard about it, had a reputation, and I saw it on like a had seasons 1 and 2 in a DVD Blu-ray combo, so that'll probably help uh, viewers and listeners maybe place where in time that would be. But I just said I'm going to give this a whirl, and boy, am I glad I did. I was struck by. I can do subs and dubs. It depends on the title. This one, as was mentioned, I heard it a lot of times thrown in there with Cowboy Bebop for just one of those anime that it's got a great dub, and it's kind of indisputable that it's a really good English dub, and so I really enjoy that. And yeah, just the action really drew me in at first, and then a lot of the characters I'm sure we'll talk about later, but in particular, I was really drawn to Revy. I know it's kind of a buzzword now that's probably disingenuously thrown out there by a lot of people, but I really do like quote unquote strong female characters or protagonists, or in Revy's case, anti-hero at best, perhaps. No, she's our protagonist, as is Rock, and she was attractive in a way, but also terrifying. And it's weird. I just mentioned horror films or something. It's that kind of weird, um, almost dichotomy that brings you in, and it's kind of inexplicable. You're like, oh, this is terrifying, but I want more. And that was my first taste of Black Lagoon. Well, speaking of, I've just said talking about characters. Let's go ahead and go into favorite characters. If you have any you feel worthwhile mentioning, if you want to say least favorite characters, what would some of those be for you, and a little bit of why, if you don't mind, and we'll spin around back to Tony.
Oh, me first? Oh, wow. I'm so honored.
Well, I
Um,
figured we'd. I think you were last in the rotation last time I had you on here, so I was just trying to just
oh, you're trying to make up for past mistakes.
butter me up.
He's trying to cover his ass,
So I could sleep at
guys.
night.
I'm kind of on the same boat with you as for favorite character. Revi is a fascinating character. I know it's cliche to say you like her because she is like this badass female character, but she's just overall unique to me. And I think one of the problems I had with the show is that they don't really explore much of her backstory, which was distracting to me. I wanted to learn more about the character. That's how great she was. She seemed like a character with a rich backstory, rich development. I mean, we know that if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, but she's supposed to be Chinese American and she comes from America, I believe. And she kind of joins the Lagoon Company out of like kind of getting away from her former life. So I'm like, why couldn't we see more of that? That's interesting. Another fascinating character, our main character, Rokuro Okajima, or as they call him in the show, Rock. Um, what was so great about this character is you see his evolution throughout the series. He starts off as a very passive, not assertive type character who just follows the rules and is not very expressive of his own. But once he joins the Lagoon Company, he begins opening up, and you start seeing a much more sinister side to him. It's kind of hinted at in the Roberta's Blood Trail OVAs, where it seems like Rock is actually kind of pulling the strings in this organization. And it was interesting to me because I'm like, he does kind of seem like that. Like he has a plan of his own that he's not telling anybody. Characters like that just fascinate me. In fact, all of Black Lagoon is just chock full of fascinating characters, many with rich backstories. This world is so interesting too. It reminds me a lot of the world of John Wick, where crime and the criminal underworld is a well acknowledged thing, and they understand how the system works. And it just was like, oh, it's so cool. The setting of Black Lagoon is a character in itself and helps to really give the anime a lot of impact. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, those are the two characters in my opinion that stood out the most, and I love their relationship too. I wish they ended up to be a couple. Unfortunately, we never got to see that, but it's okay. I could live with the platonic relationship for now until they finally make them hook up. But yes, great characters all around.
All right, very insightful comments, Tony. Thank you. That's already. I had some stuff planned, but now I got to mull over that here. So buy me some time, will you, Mike? Although I'm sure you're going to give me a lot to chew over as well. So what about you? Favorite or least favorite characters?
Well, I don't really have any least favorite characters because, like Tony was saying, even all of the quote unquote bad guy characters, all of them have like a complexity to them that's really refreshing because, despite what you see from a lot of modern anime, like a lot of people don't get, I think, enough backstory. They get they or a lot of backstory that's important. But that's something in Black Lagoon that very few characters don't get. But one of my, the three characters that always come to mind whenever I think of my favorites are Rock, Dutch, and Balalaika. I really like Rock because I think there's a lot of honesty in Rock. Tony was talking about how he evolves a little bit, but one of the things I noticed with Rock is like you can take the man out of Japan, but you can't take the Japan out of the man. Like even when he gets into it, like we have that classic scene that I'm sure even anime fans who haven't seen the anime, there's that scene where they ramp the boat into the air and destroy the helicopter, and Rock flicks him off and says "fuck you," and they end up going down and it explodes. Even though that happens, like he doesn't completely evolve into like a Revy character. Like he still kind of pulls back, or like anytime that they get into a situation where obviously he has more than one situation. He doesn't just do that one time, but like he always seems to like retreat a little bit just because that's kind of really who he is. And even though sometimes we fantasize about situations that we could be in that are more actiony or more dramatic, sometimes being the person that you are is still truly who you are. And I think that that's something that Rock comes out in Rock a lot. And then Dutch, I like Dutch a lot because he keeps it together throughout the whole thing. He's the straight man, and he's a badass leader the whole time. And one of my favorite moments with Dutch is when they're fighting the neo-Nazis, and he gets a call or he calls up. I don't remember. It's been a couple of years, but he's calling that old Nazi guy, and they're having that back and forth. And the Nazi guy is like, "If you were one of my men, I'd give you an Iron Cross, but unfortunately, you're black." And he's like, "Well, thanks, but unfortunately, I'd have to give it back to you and shove it right back up your ass." And it was just like that scene always sticks out with me because it's so badass. Like it's so in the moment. Didn't even have to think about it, puts that old Nazi in his place. So like that was, one of the things that always stood out with me about Dutch. And then Balalaika, because, much like both of you guys, like I'm really into strong female characters. And not that Revy isn't a strong female character. She's absolutely, the strong female character. But Balalaika isn't the loose cannon character. She is very much the very definition of a hardened veteran who commands respect from anybody, and nothing phases her. And unlike particular popular anime archetypes like who have that like faux leadership thing, but then really turn out to be softies who are just pushed into that position, like a Satsuki Kiryuin from Kill la Kill, or like that otaku stereotype that they want to get dominated by. Balalaika is just like, no, I'm a fucked up Soviet war veteran and I don't take shit from anybody. Fuck you. And so that was just something that always stood out with me about Balalaika. Like every time she's on the screen, she commands attention. So those are the three favorite characters that come to mind for me.
All right, awesome responses from both of you, as I predicted. Now, not easy prediction to make. Yeah, if I had to say, let's see, favorite. I mean, Dutch is he's just cool. There's can't argue that. Rock, I really like seeing him. Like that quote you said, you could take the man out of Japan, but you can't take the Japan. I want that on a T-shirt someday, man. That is that is so quotable. And you do see that. I think it would have been hokey if Rock would have ended up completely like a Revy. But we do see him change, but also he's the Japanese salary man. I mean, there's still always going to be that component of his makeup, so to speak. I really love the sort of gender role reversal a lot of times you see with Rock and Revy too. A lot of times it's Rock who, gets kidnapped by God knows who, and then Revy's got to go save him, so Rock is the damsel in distress. I love that. So I really love them both as characters, but if I had to say, I think I would say Revy Two Hands. We were talking about Western sensibilities. I think it's probably just my American upbringing that really likes that. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but she is the exact opposite of the demure, quote unquote, ideal woman from a Japanese perspective, or a lot of patriarchal cultures perspectives. She's brash, she's loud, she is who she is, and she's unapologetic about it. And speaking of backstory, I agree with Tony's sentiments on, you want to learn more about these characters, Revy in particular. But this is almost one instance where I'm almost like, I don't know if I want to learn more, because you see a little bit of, it's alluded to, and then I can't remember if it's in the OVA or when you actually see some of the trauma that Revy went through in her past. The sexual abuse is that was so unpleasant to watch. And going through Black Lagoon, again and again over the years, like I still have not watched that again, and I don't know if I ever will. If I had to, if I were, doing some sort of analysis or a review, I guess. But, it's just, and that's, getting into other waters, I realize here. But, I think, as Tony said, that added to her depth as a character, and also is something about, the work that I really find commendable. I always usually find commendable, or I at least have some degree of respect for a work when it kind of quote unquote dares to make your viewers uncomfortable. Not just going for shock value, but Black Lagoon goes into that territory several times of this will make you uncomfortable, and that was one of them. And I also I believe it was you, Tony, who said like the setting and Roanapur, the city and the locality, it is kind of its own character. It's really treated that way a lot of times, and so that's a really interesting way to look at it. But that would be my very very long-winded answer to that question. So let's see here. Moving into, I think we're naturally kind of heading that way anyway. What are some of your overall thoughts? I'm leaving this very open-ended on Black Lagoon. I guess as I was wording it in my head, like a cultural edifice, just in general now, because it's obviously Japanese, but then you have we as Westerners looking at it and critiquing it. What do you think about some of its themes or some of its takeaways, or is it trying to send some sort of message out there, or is it just kind of like a lot of Tarantino films? It's just kind of gory for gore's sake. What are some of your thoughts on that, Tony?
Initially, when I watched the anime, I always took it at face value as like, oh, it's this criminal underworld and a bunch of badasses doing badass things, and how like how they all function and stuff. But after a long time reflecting over it and thinking over it, I feel like it is kind of a critique on society as a whole. I know it's cliche to say that, like, oh, this film was a critique on society as a whole, and now we're all just kind of deep down disgusting criminals and, all that stuff. But really look at the setting of Black Lagoon, where it takes place. It almost feels like your average city in any like local place. Yeah, sure, it's run down, it's crime infested, but that's kind of like the backdrop of where like a lot of the story needs to take place. I mean, if you could put this whole thing into any different settings and it would still be the same. It's all about like who gets the upper hand over over some people, the backstabbing that goes around. Shows like House of Cards also did the same thing that Black Lagoon did, of course, with far less blood and more politics thrown into the mix. But it definitely is just a reflection on society and how it all functions, and how basically, even if you look at the criminals in this world, they're no different from a businessman. I mean, shit, the first few episodes, they sold rock out because of like a failed dealing. How are those businessmen any better than the criminals that they were actually working alongside with? In a sense, they sold rock out once he got kidnapped and stuff like that. I mean, they're no better. That's kind of like the whole point. And also, I also saw it as a way of saying that even the baddest people have some sort of code of honor, some dignity. I mean, you look at the Lagoon Company, a team of misfits who kind of form this sort of unspoken unity and bond through the missions that they served. And I believe it was sorry, give me a second. It was Mike who brought up Dutch as a character who is very fascinating and very old school in his mentality, and he deeply cares about the members of the Lagoon Company. But he's supposed to be this criminal. He's supposed to be somebody that we shouldn't trust, or someone that we shouldn't revere or respect. Yet they don't paint him as this villainous character. He does villainous things, but he's basically almost as, I guess, relatable as most people would be. And that's what I really took away after thinking long and hard about Black Lagoon. As much as these characters are criminals, they're over the top, they are considered scum of the earth, they're not really much different from modern day humans. We go through the same sort of dilemmas that they do, but theirs is definitely a bit more exaggerated. We have dilemmas, we have issues, we have angers. Sometimes we want to go on a murderous, vengeful spree like Roberta does for the sake of loved ones. It's basically life put to an exhilarated level in a sense. If that makes any sense to you guys. It's like life dialed up all the way to 50.
I that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that very much, but I really, when you were saying that, Tony, I really thought of one of my favorite lines from any movie ever, Godfather Part Two, where Michael Corleone says, "Senator, you and I are both part of the same hypocrisy." The like you said, the criminal underworld. Black Lagoon really gives us an interesting view at that, like works like The Godfather do, and at the risk of romanticizing crime, it does. When you look at something like that from an adult perspective, and you learn a little bit more about how the world works, and there's we're all mixes of good and bad, but there's legal and illegal, but that's not synonymous with good and bad. There are very bad people who know how to do everything and navigate the waters of legal loopholes, who can do something quote unquote legal but still be terrible people. And then, like you were saying, Tony, Black Lagoon, a lot of the Lagoon Company characters, you see that oh yeah, they're terrible criminals and this and that, but they have some redeemable qualities to them. But before I rant any further, Mike, what are some of your thoughts about possible themes of Black Lagoon?
Well, you'd said something about gore fests, but I think that that's just kind of something that people tend to lean for to recommend people to the show because, sometimes it can be hard to have a meaningful conversation in a minute of literally just like 1 minute of talking to somebody or in the span of 140 characters. But I think that as is Black Lagoon something that was current that will is only part of that current time, or is it, does it have some staying power and some deeper themes? I absolutely think it does because, you were talking about earlier how it makes us uncomfortable with a lot of the things that it goes on. And I mean, that's incredibly true. And how, Tony was talking about how even though Dutch and some of these other people were doing like really despicable things, they were being portrayed in a different light. And that's something I actually really noticed again, going back to that episode when they were fighting those neo Nazis and then they got on the submarine, how they were basically hearing the story of that one. We were hearing Revy's backstory a little bit, but then we were also hearing, some of they were looking for whatever that Japanese guy's stuff was on that submarine, and they were flashing back to when that Japanese guy was with these Nazis on the submarine, and those Nazis were not portrayed in any negative light. And it's really weird because they were over here, they're portraying these neo Nazis as being obviously that, but then when we flash back to World War II, obviously Japanese Axis, that whole thing, none of them were portrayed in any way that was bad or negative or evil empire. They were portrayed as normal human beings, which is a really weird thing to get into. And then, I know there was one point where, one of the things I think that makes Black Lagoon have staying power is how mature it actually is. It's not just gore porn, like it's actually really delving into things that philosophically we could have that conversation at any time. Or, there's one point in particular where I was actually kind of shocked when there's that like three-way meeting between Balalaika and that Italian guy or whatever, and she refers to him as a Guido, and that's actually a really derogatory term for Italian people. And I'm like, holy shit, like they actually said that in an anime. That's something that you would expect out of like Taxi Driver and not, something that's in the same vein as Air and Canon and stuff like that, anime as we see it. And I think Black Lagoon, you're talking about, Tony was talking about John Wick, and then we're talking about, you're talking about Tarantino. I think that's really what they did with Black Lagoon is they looked at it as a piece of film, a piece of art a little bit. Obviously, there's contemporary stuff in there. Any older anime fan will look at that and be, oh, it obviously looks more modern, and it has, there's a couple things in there that are more sensible to an American fan. But overall, I think, I don't know the director right offhand or the creator of the manga, the author, but they definitely looked at Black Lagoon as a piece of art and not as a new anime. And I think that gives it a lot of staying power. I think it gives it a lot of commendability too, because there's, even in season 2 where they were kind of leaning more towards stereotypes and, archetypes of modern anime, like with the Japanese setting and the Yakuza and the younger female character in school, even though they were starting to lean a little bit more towards that in the second season, it still was very much Black Lagoon. It was still very much its mature outing that we had in the first season. And so I think absolutely that it is a piece of cinema, deep cinema that you could look into, even though every once in a while somebody's getting blown to pieces and there's blood flying everywhere.
Well, well said, gentlemen. I think I pretty much have to agree with that. I do think, there is a lot on the surface that you could say it's being brutal for brutality's sake, with a lot of the violence and the gun shooting and the stylistically very gun fu John Woo kind of stuff, and there's nothing wrong with that, and I think that's like a good action film. But absolutely, there is more to it than that, and as is evident already here, you can get very different answers from very different people on this, even though they watch the same thing. And I think that's another one of those, not always a surefire thing, but one of those things you kind of look out for that suggests something is probably, a legitimate work of art, so to speak, is its ability to be so multifaceted. I think a theme that Black Lagoon really, where it really stands on its own two legs, so to speak, is how nihilistic it is. And, the internet throws that word around a lot, and, you want to be edgy, and a lot of stuff has hints of that. Black Lagoon really, really hits that nail on the head hard. And again, I have respect for that because that's to me ambitious because especially from an American Hollywood quadrants and ratings perspective on our film industry, that's not popular. You want some sort of cheesy love story where everything works out in the end. Black Lagoon ain't about that. It shows the underbelly of society, whether it be quote unquote legitimate politics, businesses, or the criminal underworld. And I remember when Rock and Revy were really, going at it, and you think, oh, geez, Revy's this is going to be it. She's going to finally blow Rock's brains out here, and because Rock was arguing, and from a legitimate point, which shows you that it doesn't just it's not a it doesn't just harp on that one note all of the time. Is you have Rock was arguing with Revy on that, and Revy goes something to the effect of like, look around, there's no fucking Robin Hood, and basically saying, there are no heroes in the world. She experienced that in her past. Nobody came to save her. I think it was when she was assaulted or raped. I think she was, if I recall correctly, she was in jail. So these were men in, uniform representative of, like state power, which just that of course that's going to affect your outlook on life. And there's a lot of validity to that kind of assertion. But then, Rock counters with, so if there is no Robin Hood, then why don't you become Robin Hood? If the world needs heroes, then why don't you step up to the plate? Why don't more of us do that? And that's one of those which I really love, that it wasn't one of those Revy all of a sudden goes, we're talking about anime or manga cliches, this one of those, oh, you're so right. I was so hurt by my tragic past, but now I believe, like, no, there was none of that. I think it gave her enough pause to stop her from shooting him, which is amazing in and of itself. But, she's not going to change her worldview. And sadly, you see Rock kind of get a little more and more quote unquote corrupted the longer he's with Black Lagoon, and sees a lot of the ugly side of humanity. But he still has a legitimate point. And it's one of those unanswerable questions. Then why don't you become Robin Hood? It's so open ended. And it's so quote unquote not safe. If you're a producer, producing a TV show or series or a movie or something, that's kind of unsettling. There's no easy answer to that, and unfortunately, I can't think of them all right now. But I know there are other instances in Black Lagoon as well that take you to unpleasant places like that again, where there isn't an easy answer. I mean, especially where, oh, I don't know how much I even want to go into it, but you get to those the Romanian orphans, that were forced to be in these sorts of films. It's just, I don't even want to say it. It's just so horrible. And I mean, again, this is where hopefully everyone listening knows what happens. There's no spoilers there, but it's almost like putting down an injured dog or something. Like some people look at it with that much callousness and just, oh, you just got to put it out of its misery. And poor Rock, obviously didn't see it that way, and I would hope most people wouldn't see it that way. But it brings up, it provokes you, uncomfortable places, as we said, and then it poses these questions to you that you don't really want to think about. Like, are there emotional, psychological traumas from which you cannot recover? And I don't even have an answer for that right now. I think I'll leave it at that. But that's just uh, one of the questions that Black Lagoon made me think about, and I'll always respect it for that. And as Mike and you, Tony, as you both have said in different ways, that is not exclusive to any one point in history. That is timeless. Well, I guess uh, obviously it's not a rated E for everyone experience reading or viewing here, but would you recommend Black Lagoon to another anime fan, or would you recommend it to somebody who even isn't an anime fan, never seen anime before, or has certain conceptions about what anime is, and why or why not? And Tony, we'll turn the mic over to you.
Oh hell yeah! I would definitely recommend Black Lagoon to people. It's not like recommending Berserk, where you'll regret recommending it because you know just how dark the show will go and how unfulfilling the ending is. Black Lagoon definitely has a lot of like cheer moments. Yeah, it definitely touches on a lot of dark subjects, but I don't think that should ever stop somebody from checking something out. I don't really believe in the idea of like if something triggers you, then you should stay away from it. The world is challenging. It challenges you, and you should be able to confront these challenges head first because the world's never going to really protect you from it. And that's the beauty about Black Lagoon. It shows you the ugliness of the world unapologetically, and it's very rare to see anime do that. The only time I ever seen an anime really show how disgusting and cruel this world can be, even though it was a bit of an exaggeration, was Berserk. They tackled very dark subjects like prostitution, child prostitution, rape, violence, all that stuff. And Black Lagoon also addresses these issues and how they are big problems in this world, as both of you have made clear in your descriptions of how you felt about the show already. But that doesn't mean that the show doesn't have a lot of fun with itself too. The action scenes are fantastic. One of my favorite battles is between Revi and Roberta. The first time they bump into Roberta, and it was like kind of an interesting dilemma because it was the first time I think both Revi and Roberta met somebody that was kind of like their equal, and it was just so interesting to see them clash constantly with this. I had a lot of fun watching the show. Yeah, there are dark subject matter, but they never really took away from my enjoyment. In fact, it might have even enhanced it because it was willing to go down those dark places and never look back. So yeah, if you're a fan of anime, I definitely recommend checking out Black Lagoon. It's one of the hallmarks of the anime as a whole. I'm not one to say like this is what like if you don't see this, you're not a true anime fan. But if you consider yourself a connoisseur of anime, and I'm talking like all genre of anime, it's one of them that you might have to check out.
All right, man. Speaking of quotable lines here, full of them in this cast here, man. Thank you for your 2 cents there, Tony. Mike, what do you think about recommending this show to others?
Well, I mean, you talk about ratings and rated A for awesome and all of the above. Like Black Lagoon is one of those series, like Tony said, that like regardless of whether or not you are into that genre, it's something, I don't phrase it. I don't want to phrase it as something like if you're a true anime fan, it's more like as an anime fan bucket list. Like these are essential series that you need to watch at some point, just because there's a good chance it'll probably change your worldview just a little bit or enhance it a little bit. And Black Lagoon is definitely one of those series. Now, if you're somebody, and there are people who exist that stick strictly to high school romance or slice of life or the K-On stuff, they probably won't want to watch it, but you make them watch it anyway because then maybe they will, have a better, more enhanced taste of anime. But no, I mean, and I would even recommend Black Lagoon to people who aren't anime fans because, I said this a little bit before, even though it very much has a contempt, not now, we're talking a series that is now 10 years old, which is still crazy to think about, but it's a series that it has a little bit of a newer anime feel post 2000, but and I think Westerners are really weird with that. People from the West, England, France, wherever, the US, they don't really see it the way that regular casual anime fans do. But I mean, as soon as the mercenaries and the nihilism and the coarse language and the blood come in, I think that's when people will kind of turn around and go, "Oh, okay, this isn't just one of those child things. Like this is very much an adult-oriented series aimed at adults." So, no, I would recommend it to anybody and everybody.
All right, there you go. Those two hearty answers there. Admittedly, I would show some restraint. That's just me. And of course, just I mean, just like an R-rated movie, I guess. If it's obviously if it's someone younger, or if it's somebody who's just like very 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 squeamish about that sort of stuff, I would I'm not gonna be not saying you guys would obviously, but I wouldn't be mean and be like, oh yeah, this is fine. Go ahead and watch it. Let your kids watch it. No, but but no, I would with the I don't know if caveat is the right word here, but letting people know it's a serious work of art, and you're going to go to unpleasant places. I guarantee it. But if you are brave enough, you won't regret it. And so, in that spirit, I would recommend it to both avid consumers of anime and those who may have never even watched a single anime series in their life. I've mentioned him
By the way,
a lot of times. Oh, sorry, Tony, you go ahead.
oh no, I was just gonna say like I wanted to jump off of what Mike said earlier about like if you're a fan of like romance or slice of life or K-On. Funny enough, my favorite genre, ladies and gentlemen, is the romance genre, and even I recommended this anime. So I think it's an anime that could appeal to people that prefer softer anime. You know, as much as I love the cutesy and stuff, I think an anime like Black Lagoon is something that you should add to your bucket list. You know, as a fan of anime, taste it all. You'd be surprised of what you're going to end up liking. I love the hell out of Black Lagoon. All right, back to you, John.
No, that's perfectly in line with what I was just getting to myself and I like anime bucket list. I like that. We should work to make that a thing on the internet more. But I love that idea. But I was just gonna say I've mentioned him a lot of times on this podcast. My good friend and roommate who quote unquote hates all things anime. Um, that was his preconception about anime was one thing, a lot of the moe stuff and what have you. And I'm trying to think. I probably mentioned him in maybe the One Punch episode we did. He really liked that. So he's seen a couple of anime titles like Berserk, Cowboy Bebop, and the way I got him to even try anime was I was like, dude, because he likes a lot of dark stuff like that and all that. So I was like, dude, check this out. I know it's an anime, but check this out with me. And he also doesn't like, oh, subtitles. I'm like, this has a good dub. Watch this with me. And we watched Black Lagoon, and he was moved by it. And I appreciate that, he was, I guess, big enough to, say, wow, I didn't know there was anime like this. I didn't know had all these different genres and could be such high art like this. And there was times when we were laughing at the funny moments, like was mentioned when Rock, I think, gives his first middle finger as they blow up that helicopter, and he feels like he's one of the crew a little bit for the first time. To the more unpleasant stuff, like we were talking about, we were moved. We were two, in our early 20s, but two grown men trying not to burst into actual weeping with by the time the end credits rolled and it was playing what is that song what is that song I mentioned it on the songs cast. The World of Midnight, that's what it is. My brain naturally doesn't even want to remember. It's like, don't go there, man, don't do it. But man, by the time we got to that, we were just like, like we just like couldn't look at each other for a while because we both knew. We were like, yeah, that was so I'm gonna queue up the next episode. Yeah, I'm gonna go get some more beer from the fridge. Okay, good. We're both doing manly stuff, not emotional at all. We're fine. So that's at least horrific memory in one sense, but there's a actually funny and good memory that Black Lagoon gave me there, and one of the reasons I will always, as has been said, I'll chime in as well. I'll always recommend Black Lagoon to those who are ready for it. P.S. You're never really ready for it, but
P.S. I love you.
PPS. Oh man, ain't no ain't no rom-coms here. But no, I guess I just if we have some time, gentlemen, I just reserve this at the end here, as I try to always do, just for open discussion or anything in general. Is there anything else that that you kind of wanted to talk about or just comment on before we bow out today?
Yeah, I mean, we actually spent a lot of time praising Black Lagoon, but to keep it even, like, what were some things that we all didn't like about? But what were some of the weaker elements to Black Lagoon? Starting with you, John.
Boy, that's a good question, man. And you did this to me last cast I had you on, Tony. I go grr, but no, I appreciate it. Put me on the
I
spot
I,
here.
I love throwing those curveball questions. I
Yes.
believe as people that appreciate anime, and especially for me being a reviewer, I like being balanced about how I look at an anime. That's why I do the pros and the cons. I believe everything to a certain degree will have a pro and a con. Even anime that I praise among all and consider epic masterpiece, there are things that I think are flawed about it. May not be enough to detract from the anime, but definitely something to be noteworthy and bring up and say, hey, well, this kind of stuck out as kind of like a little glaring issue, something of a nitpick, stuff like that.
That's fair. That's fair. And by the way, you've got that down to a science, man, on your channel with being critical like that. So I would say, let me think. Well, boy, I guess one. I mean, I don't know, but I was thinking something Mike might chime in on, or what he said. It reminded me a little bit of was the arc or what have you when they go to Japan.
I was actually gonna just say that when you got done.
There you go. I was right. Um, but I don't know what Mike will say about it. I have a good idea, but a weak part of it, I will concede yes, but in my opinion, but I still think it was done really well, because you have the people working on it are Japanese, the original author, and then you have Rock himself. He's Japanese, and he's thrown out of his comfort zone, and he gets to have this little glimpse of and the prospect of going back home, and he meets this girl who, I guess, just for him being a typical Japanese man, he's more comfortable with than Revi, because she's soft spoken, and Revi's the opposite of soft spoken. Um, Also, another one I guess I would say is difficult to nitpick because it was brought up several times by you guys, and really really good moments. So I wouldn't want to get rid of those by any means, but I did feel a little bit like, and it's not fair because this is me coming from an American perspective. This is Japanese work here, but Nazis or neo Nazis are a pretty easy, if you need a bad guy, if you need a villain, everyone can kind of just agree on, oh yeah, Nazis, fuck them, I mean, Indiana Jones and all of that, and but it was really well done. Um, I guess another thing would be, this is just a bit of a cultural disconnect, was when they like kill all the neo Nazis and they finally get to the old Grand Poobah Nazi, whatever you call that. And I can't remember if it's Revi or if it's Dutch who slides him the pistol. And, like that's felt like a Tarantino moment. I'm sure many other action films, but I was just, oh my God. And you're like, what's going to happen? Is a pinky going to get chopped off? What's going to happen here? You don't know. But they basically give him this gun, and they insinuate to him, they imply like, all right, man, like, what are you gonna do? And like giving him that, like basically taunting him, like you should just go ahead and put a bullet in your brain, save us the trouble. And he picks it up like he's gonna do that, but then the last minute he aims the gun at one or both of them, like he's gonna take one of them out with him, even if it only had one shot, but the gun was actually unloaded. So he's just awkwardly click, 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 and Rock and Revy, and I'm watching the dub, so I got really, really, drawn into the whole world of it. And both Revy and Dutch were like, "Oh wow, man, that's geez, yeah, I thought maybe you'd do the dignified thing at the very end there." And my roommate and friend who is not familiar with Japanese culture very much, or anime or anything like that, was just like, what on earth are they talking about? Actually, he's like has a Scandinavian background, so he's quite up on his Viking culture and mythology. And he's just like, what are they talking about? And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, that was the quote unquote honorable thing to do. Like if you're, to go out in battle and to die fighting, that's the honorable way to go. Well, then you think about it. Oh, wait, no, that's probably not even to this day, probably not the Japanese standard of the honorable thing to do. There would have been, I mean, we're coming from a culture that had ritual suicide for certain moments just like that. And so when you're dealing with the fact that it was a Japanese author making these characters, they're from quote unquote the West, and then you have the great, I think they were both Ocean Studios alumni doing it for Jenny on back in the day, doing a great English dub. You were just kind of I was just kind of thrown out of it for a little bit there because it's like, yeah, that's you know what I mean. So that, but that's the best I can do. I assume that's probably your intent, Tony. I'll go ahead and cover my own butt, and I'll pass the buck onto Mike here.
Well, I mean that was pretty. Yeah, you got me nailed pretty well there, John. I felt like the one thing in Black Lagoon that kind of, I mean, you can't expect everybody to hit a fucking home run every single time. And I mean, I would consider Black Lagoon a home run, but it's a shaky home run. It's a home run that the catcher missed because he could have jumped over the rail. I felt like the weakest part of Black Lagoon was its tropes. I felt like they were not abashed at all about putting in tropes. God, I got that word on my brain.
Tropes.
They were
This is
they
a
were
great
not
show.
afraid.
It's amazing.
They were not afraid to put those in there, and like with the Nazis thing, I felt like that little backstory they had about the old Japanese guy and the Nazis. I felt like that kind of evened it out a little bit because it wasn't like the stereotypical, oh whatever, and also having like an actual Nazi lead them. But then again, it's like, it's American History X, like that's like they weren't trying anything different. Oh, neo-Nazis. Granted, they probably have to deal with that, but I'd like to think that they're not that organized. I think they're giving them a little bit too much credit, and just, they're looking for a bad guy. And then the part in Japan, I'm not gonna say I groaned, but like when they meet that one Yakuza guy and he's like taunting Revy, and Rock is like, "No, Revy, don't do anything," and he like gropes her, and I'm thinking, and he hits, and all Revy does is hold back and then hit him. I'm thinking to myself, like, what in the fuck did I just watch? Because there is no way in the world that Revy, having gone through sexual abuse and all the shit that she's gone with, that she wouldn't have just put a bullet in his head and said, "Fuck you, Rock." Because if she was willing to put a bullet in Rock's head without him actually having to stand up for herself, there's no way in the world, that she would have let that guy live. No way. No way in the world. And so I thought that was like John was saying. I was like, they were letting their Japanese show a little bit. Like they were like, well, she's not gonna kill him, and it's like, no, she would have killed him. Like that's exactly what she would have done. And then the whole story arc in Japan, I felt was. I mean, I guess I'm projecting a little bit when I say this, but I kind of felt like with the first season, it was very Western, 100% Western, even though they were in Thailand. It was very much not Japan. And I feel like because Black Lagoon didn't do the gangbusters that a lot of other anime do, to me that kind of felt like maybe with the second season they were trying to push them towards doing something that was a little bit more Japanese, a little bit more, in the wheelhouse of something that would be a little bit more popular. Like, it's set in Japan with Yakuza, which obviously there's a huge game franchise called Yakuza, and they're in Japan with Japanese people and Japanese storylines. Like the whole thing was very Japanese. It wasn't like you took Japanese people like Rock and put them in a Western storyline. It was Japan, Japan, Japan. And that part kind of rolled my eyes at, because I'm like, oh, here we go. Like when you go to something like Black Lagoon, you want it to be away from Japan. And I mean, obviously you can only get so far away. It's it's a Japanese production made with Japanese people, but it's like, if you're gonna go for the Tarantino or John Woo thing, like I want you to distance yourself from it. Like I want you to commit to that. And the other thing too, that you were talking with tropes, it's like the killer nuns thing, like that they did. I was like, Again, I kind of rolled my eyes. I was like, it's cool, but like you're checking tropes off of a list, like, oh, they did that one in the action scene, they did that one in the action scene. It was like, when you go into stuff like Machete or Machete Lives, or like the really super over the top stuff, like you kind of expect it just because like it doesn't have any other preface. That is exactly what it is. But with something like Black Lagoon, where it's dabbing into really dark stuff, but also having like a real complexity to it, and not, I was hired to kill the president and he tried to kill me, I killed him. Like there's kind of an expectation that it's not going to follow all of those tropes, because that's not, it's not super B movie. It's not hobo with a shotgun. It's more of a, almost, maybe not Godfather-esque, but something more like Taxi Driver, something that's a little bit more nihilistic, something that's a little bit more like thinking about stuff. And that was really my biggest complaint. Was there were definitely a couple of times where I'm looking at it and I'm like, I appreciate everything else you're doing and I love it and I'm having a great time, but that definitely could have been done a little bit more, maybe not even originally, but done a little bit more unique.
Man, man, I'm recalling the review you did as well, Tony. I don't want to make you just have to re-say all of that, but I'm gonna have to aim it back to you now, sir. Okay, it's like a dare. Okay, we all did it, man. No, you have to do it.
Dare. Come on, man, your turn. Um, just like both of you, it's been a very long time since I've seen Black Lagoon, but I think one of the things that stood out to me the most, that irritated me, was just a lot of incompleteness with the stories. I felt like there was a lot of things that were left lingering that always irked me. And one of the things I really hated was the fact that as the series went on, there was less and less involvement of the entire Lagoon company. Like in the first season, Butch and what's the white guy's name again? Someone tell me,
Uh,
please.
is
It's
it Benny?
Benny.
There we
Benny,
go. And
yes.
Dutch. Yeah, I think you said
Yeah, Dutch
Butch.
and Benny. They started becoming so sidelined as characters. Like I remember when I was watching the Roberta's Blood Trail, they made two appearances, didn't do much. They appeared and then they just kind of disappeared again. And I was saying to myself, okay, if there's one thing I've always appreciated is the fact that these guys were a group. They were together. And then in season two, it became pretty much like the Rock and Revy show where they went and did their missions. And sometimes, Butch and Betty will pop up and hang out with everybody, but then it's just back to the Rock and Revy show. Yes, I get they're the most interesting. I enjoyed them the most, but the balance was thrown off. The beauty of Butch and Benny is it's supposed to be a kind of counteracting of the big personalities of Revy and Rock. They're the subdued ones in a sense, and they kind of help balance this team out. When it becomes the Rock and Revy show, I'm just like, well, where's everybody else? I don't really remember all the problems that I had with the show, but definitely the lack of like closure for some of these stories. Oh, another thing is like they introduced the twins, the Hansel and Gretel of the show. I remember they made a big deal about them, and I thought they were going to have a much bigger impact on the story. But they're only in what 3 to 4 episodes, and then they die. Oh, spoiler alert, they die.
They know by
Um,
now. They've been warned.
but and I was thinking back to their arc and how very inconsequential it was. I was saying, God damn, it would have been nice to see more of them and see the impact they had as characters to other characters and the overall plot. They kind of forgotten after a while, and that was disappointing. And I didn't like the whole incestuous vibe between them, so that was another little nitpick. But yeah, those are some of the things that irked me. I do agree with many of the things that you both brought up too as problems with the show. But overall, great show.
Yeah, yeah, it's like being an inspector, I guess, when you get into that mode. You're like, "Oh, I don't want to. It's a really nice house, but you do got a little bit of mold in this corner." Just letting you know, just like And what's funny is now you mentioning Roberta, and like that made me think the other day about when we were kind of preparing for this, like um and I just thought in my head here, like, oh, speaking of tropes and because Japan, and like I think it was with Otaku USA. I'm not sure, but I saw in an interview, like the author was asked about Roberta and the other maid. I Her name escapes me right now, but like just the whole, they're in like a full French maid outfit, and they were basically like asking him like, what's with that, man? Is that just like an otaku thing you're throwing in there, or like what was it? And he like played it off as like he didn't even think of that. He was like, "Oh no, I don't know. They're a rich South American, uh, or were they cartels? I think they were the cartels. Yeah, it's like I don't know. They have a maid. I just thought I don't know. That's probably what a maid would wear. And I'm like, I'm like that's funny. It's like, do they not? They don't even know when they're doing it. But, I guess if nobody else had anything else, something real quick I wanted to just throw in there too that I don't think I got to gush over enough was I really liked the relationship between Rock and Revy. I really think, again, coming from the anime specifically, there drawing from the manga, I really think um, for me, they hit all the right buttons, so to speak. It's not forced. Never comes across as that. Never comes across as things happening too quickly. It's something that naturally could kind of happen in that. I don't want to say quite Stockholm syndrome, but it could happen in that sort of situation. And Revy, because of who she is and because of her past, you're never going to see. I don't know if he ever does this way later in the manga, which to my understanding is still going. If he ever did this, it would be a sin against the work. I hope he never does. But Revy is never going to be that lovey-dovey, like we're talking about rom-coms, nothing wrong with them in and of themselves. But like, if you ever did that with Rock and Revy, it would have completely ruined the work for me. Dare I say? I think it just would have been too unbelievable. It would have been too hokey. It would have felt too forced. But there is something there. It's just very, very, very nuanced. It's very, very, very subtle, and it's very, very, very underplayed, understated. Um, a lot of people point out the scene where I think it's Rock has his cigarette lit first, and then Revy lights her cigarette from Rock's. And people even call that, like, quote unquote, oh, that kiss scene. And it's like their heads are in that kind of position, but they're like, their lips are not really anywhere near each other. It's like that's the closest you're gonna get in the world of Black Lagoon. That's the Black Lagoon equivalent of like a passionate, over the top French kiss. I thought that was funny. And one of the saving graces for the Japanese setting, when they go there, for me, I really, really loved um, when I think it's when he's in his home neighborhood and he's going to see his parents before he decides not to at the very last minute. But so he goes, and Revy's just like staying in the park waiting for him. And when Rock comes back, Revy doesn't know how long he's been there, that he's been watching her. She just doesn't notice him come up, and she's actually kind of playing with these kids in the park. They were these, I think, a couple of boys, and they just had toy guns, and Revy was just kind of playing with them. And it was just enough for me. It was perfect. If it would have been too much, it would have felt insincere. It wouldn't have felt like Revy. But it was just enough that you see her. She still has a heart and capacity for some tenderness, even though she's been through so much. Poor Revy. And as soon as she notices that Rock sees her, immediately the barriers, the defenses, so to speak, go back up. And she's whatever, get out of here, kid. And it's just I thought, oh, that's probably one of my favorite scenes from all of Black Lagoon. If I had to pick, incidentally. Well, thank you, listeners and viewers, for joining us once again for another installment of Who Cares About Anime. Hope it was enjoyable for you. We certainly had a great time. If you're new to us, welcome. You can find us on iTunes. You can find us on YouTube, as well as VidMe now. And of course, we got whocaresaboutAnime.com. Got a blog there, and we'll archive posts there as well. Hope you subscribe to us. Stick around for future episodes. You never know what title we're going to do. It may be old, new. It may be popular. It may be niche. And you never know who's going to jump in. But we're always going to have a good time. And which reminds me also, a new feature we have now. Today's episode was sponsored by Did You Know Anime? And if you would like to sponsor an upcoming future episode for just $1, we did start up a little Patreon account because everyone else is doing it. We don't want to be unpopular or uncool. So you can check the description for links and info on that, and also for links to Mike's stuff that I help him with, Did You Know Anime, and to Tony's channel, Black Critic Guy. They are both worth your time if you enjoy anime. I promise you that. So thank you once again, gentlemen, for being here today. Thank you, listeners and viewers, and we'll see you next time.